Hello out there. My name is Logan. This is a GRE free prep hour. Thanks for watching. If you are on our YouTube channel and you have come across this video, definitely check out the playlist of prep hours. There are dozens and dozens of these free 1-hour lessons on almost every topic on the GRE. And the topic that we're going to be looking at tonight is sentence equivalence. It's one of the vocab types. And the specific thing we're going to be looking at is something that some of our resources will call false triples or false triplets sometimes. And this is basically places where there's three words that seem like they are close enough to pick, but we're only supposed to pick two. So that's the subject for tonight. Welcome in if you are here live, and thanks for watching if you are watching online after the fact. So if you haven't done much GRE studying before or specifically seen sentence equivalence, here's what these questions are like. There are two right answers for the same blank. The two answers, they don't have to be, exact synonyms, but they need to make sentences that are about the same. That's why they call it sentence equivalences. So usually they'll be close to being synonyms, even if they're not exactly synonyms. And then you see 4 of these in every verbal section. So every verbal section on the GRE is 20 questions. And you tend to see, this is not officially stated by the GRE, so they could change this, but you tend to see these around questions 12 to 15 or 13 to 16. So about 2/3 of the way through the test, you'll get a little batch of these sentence equivalence questions. These are actually one of my favorite types of question on the verbal side, and that's because we have 2 pretty good ways of going about them. Oops, I'm blocking my own text there. So there's 2 ways that you can handle these sentence equivalence questions, and we're going to look at plenty of them tonight, so you'll get to practice. The first one is something very similar to what you might do in the other type of fill in the blank question, where you are just filling in one answer per blank. And that's where you just look at the sentence, find the most important piece of evidence that relates to that blank, basically predict what the answer should be in your head. Probably you're predicting a word that's a little bit simpler than some of the words that the GRE uses, but then your job is to find the word that matches what you expected. You can still do that and should still do that on sentence equivalence. It's very important to match the evidence in the sentence. But there is another tool available to us here, and that is actually looking for those pairs in the answer choices. There will often only be certain answers that make sense together. And if the 2 answers aren't a pair, you can't pick them. So that's one of the things that takes getting used to about this type, is that if an answer doesn't have a pair, if an answer choice doesn't have a pair, don't pick it, even if it makes sense in the sentence. And that's where they kind of get you. If you haven't practiced this, it's very possible to look at a question of this type, pick one that makes sense in the sentence, but it doesn't have really a close enough pair in the answer choices. So what we're going to be looking at tonight is basically, well, sometimes they give you 3 words that kind of make sense in the sentence, 3 or even 4. But a lot of times 3 of them are very close together. How can we figure out which of those 3 is the odd word out, which is the one that we're not supposed to pick as a correct answer? We're going to look at a few of those, or basically a few examples tonight where this happens, and use that to make our calls and learn a little bit about how to navigate these questions. Okay. Let's go check out one. I'm just going to post one right here. Try it out if you're here live, and if you're watching online, take a minute or so, think about this question, and then I will talk about it in a moment. What would you pick? Let me know in the chat if you're here and have thought of what answer you might pick on this one. Oh, hold on. My screen seems to have disappeared. Pardon me. Where'd it go? Where are you? Yeah, I see. Kayla, thanks for the vote. And sorry my screen disappeared. Oh, just did it again. I keep accidentally displacing my slide screen with my Zoom screen. Yeah. So you got this one. The interesting thing is you might have noticed, especially if you have Google and you look this up, this is actually not a word, not a word. So this is not quite a real GRE question, but sometimes when we're doing questions in class, we'll throw in kind of these fake words because, you know, kind of imagine this was any word you don't know. And in this case, I got a vote here for impulsive and rash. Were there any others that you thought were like kind of close to possibly being correct? Welcome in, Mary Ware. I see you joining us. Yeah, arbitrary is a note I got in the chat, and I think that's the one that kind of most closely matches these two for me. And it's one of the first examples we're looking at of where there's kind of three answers here that maybe could make sense in the blank. And I would even argue oppressive could make sense in the blank, right? If the people are dissatisfied, there's some evidence, then the main thing we could maybe predict is that these decisions are bad decisions somehow. And we also have this evidence of without regard for. So there's something that's not being considered well enough in these choices. That evidence that it's bad decisions and that something is not being regarded, I think lends itself well to impulsive, rash, and arbitrary. But how do we break the tie? Because Kayla, you were actually spot on in your first guess that the right answers are, here, I'll do it this way. The right answers are impulsive and rash. They're the best pair. Anybody out there, welcome in Kevron as well. Comparing impulsive and rash to arbitrary, like what makes these two better? What makes these two answers a little better than arbitrary? Tell me in the chat. For me, even though all three of these can be a decision that's happening without regard, you know, arbitrary, impulsive, and rash might be bad decisions made without regard for something. But impulsive and rash both specifically mean without regard to the consequences. You know, decisions made very hastily, decisions made without thinking about what's going to happen after the decision is made. Whereas arbitrary is kind of a decision made without any reasoning, so without any like clear logic. So still something that's maybe not a good decision, but it's just not quite as close as impulsive and rash are to each other. So this is a first sort of actual sentence equivalence question of the night. And I want to point out a couple of things before we go on and do some more. One is that, yeah, we had at least 3 or 4 words that could make sense in the blank. I think this government's decisions could be oppressive as well. But only two really matched each other very well. Then there's also this. Logical and rational. These are a pair as well. Also a pair, but an opposite pair. So there is benefit to studying the answer choices themselves, but you do always need to hop back to the sentence itself to collect your evidence, because you can't just be looking for pairs. There could be pairs that are the exact opposite of what you're looking for, or otherwise just don't match what you're looking for. If you are like totally stuck, then that's where answer choice analysis, can at least help you make a good guess. Because if you're looking for pairs, you're going to see a positive pair and a negative pair, and then two sort of negative words without a pair. And at least that you have to pick one of the two pairs. So you kind of have a 50% chance of guessing. Still better to have closer to 100% chance by actually comparing it to the sentence. But the lesson is answer choice analysis, using those answers to find pairs without even referencing the sentence. It can help. It can help when you don't understand the sentence, but you still want to make sure that you're supported by the evidence. So what we're going to do tonight is just keep going through and find, a few different ways that we might break a tie between similar words. Here it was sort of fairly straightforward. Even though these three words are similar, they still didn't quite have the same meaning. Think of these as like Venn diagrams. Like a lot of the same actions might be impulsive and arbitrary, but not quite all. Almost all of the impulsive actions will probably also have been rash. So this is what you were saying in the chat there, Merriwear, if I'm saying your name right, that these two words are just closer to being synonyms than impulsive and arbitrary, even though there's some overlap over here as well. What we're going to do tonight is answer this question: how do you break the tie? And we're going to break the tie in a few different ways. We're going to find the odd word out in a few different ways. One of them is meaning, like we just saw. Another one is spin, or you might also think of this as tone. Spin or tone. What do these all mean? These all mean frugal, thrifty, and cheap. These all mean like not spending much money. But frugal and thrifty tend to be a little bit more complimentary. They have a more positive tone. Cheap has a more negative tone. So even though they have a quite similar definition, they have a different spin and tone. Watch out for that as well. Next thing that you can use as kind of a tiebreaker is strength. Criticize is a word we use all the time in life. Excoriate and castigate are not as much so, but they both mean to criticize severely, to dramatically criticize. So here, all three have a similar meaning in terms of their direction. They all have to do with criticizing folks. But excoriate and castigate just take that direction farther. They have a stronger sort of degree to them. So you can think of this one as, if spin, if you prefer the word tone, you can think of it that way. Strength, you can think of it as like extremeness. How extreme is the word? Then there's a last type that is a little bit more of a last line of defense, which is usage. Like basically, how does the word get used grammatically or idiomatically? Like how does it just tend to be used in English? Do any of y'all who are here live tonight know what these three words mean? They do have a similar meaning. Flag, droop, and enervate. Anybody know? No clue about droop. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I see it there in the chat. It's about to take energy from, to lose energy. All three of these have to do with losing energy. But they're kind of used differently. You could say, I was flagging at the end of the race. Flag, of course, that set of letters can mean a few other things as well. But if you've ever heard, I don't know, a sports commentator say someone was flagging, that means they were running out of energy. And then you could also say, I was drooping at the end of the race. Think of it as if you were saying, like, I was fading, I was running out of energy. You could not say, I was enervating at the end of the race. You would have to say, here, let me just like this. Let me cross that off, because you couldn't say I was enervating. Even though enervate means something similar, its usage is more like the race enervated me. The race took my energy. So grammatically, this word enervate has, I think it's a subject and an object. It's done by something to something else, right? Whereas flag and droop is something that's happening internally. So that's a different grammatical usage. Now, that is sort of a more rare case of how you might break one of these triples, but it can come up. So that's why enervate is the odd word out. Okay, so we are going to have like about 30 to 40 minutes here to look at the rest of the questions that I've pulled. All the questions I've pulled, they have, in my opinion, something like a false triple, where there are three words that debatably are close to fitting the sentence, but only two of them can really fit each other. Let's try some. Here's a first one. Tell us in the chat once you have a guess for your two answers. Hey, y'all, I just realized I made a typo bringing this sentence in. It's not unrelated. It's related. Sorry about that. I could change the direction of the sentence. Yes, it was not making too much sense with unrelated, right? Pop your best guesses in the chat. Okay. I'm seeing some votes for B and F. Tell me as well, were there any others y'all were considering besides that? Not because I necessarily don't like those. I'm just curious to hear, were there any you were on the fence about? E, I see there was a little bit of thought about E. Yeah, okay, a couple people were interested in E. What evidence in the sentence helps us, like, leads us into these answers of divergent, distinguish, incongruous as sort of things to consider? Yeah, the yet, specifically the related yet. And that's why somebody wrote in the chat, thank goodness, when I said it's actually related, not unrelated, because what is this telling us? That the answer should have something to do with being unrelated. Basically, we want unrelated, the opposite of related. We call these, if you haven't studied vocab questions much yet, we often call words like this pivot words, places where the sentence changes direction and leads you into the opposite of one of the pieces of evidence. This is telling us that the answer should be unrelated. Divergent definitely means unrelated. It means something like different. Distinguished could mean a couple different things. It could mean, someone who is distinguished could mean like almost like a dignified person. But two things that are distinguished from each other could mean that they are set apart, that they're different as well. And then there's also incongruous, that again means something similar to different. But y'all liked divergent and incongruous the most. And so do I. And I think there's something about these two that kind of goes together. It's another one where I think this is mainly, if we're considering these three, divergent, distinguished, and incongruous, it's mainly because divergent and incongruous specifically mean different or kind of going in different directions specifically. You might hear the word divergent of like two paths, diverged in the wood, so to speak. And incongruous also means different, doesn't go together. Both of these kind of match the sentence, right? It's surprising, that's another key word in the sentence, surprising that both of these fields of thought came from the same person. So it makes sense that those would be two things that don't go together, or that are going in different directions. Whereas distinguished just meaning kind of maybe set apart from each other. An example of this usage of distinguished would be the two awards were distinguished from each other because one was gold and one was silver. So it does still have to do with being different, but it's not as much about two things that are just totally different. It's a little bit more subtle. So it might be that this is a case kind of like the example of degree, extremeness, where I would say distinguish is debatably close to the right meaning, but doesn't go far enough. There's another one that it sounds like y'all weren't too interested in, but sometimes it comes up here as well. And that's complementary, which often means like different and positive. So two complementary things, you're describing two things that are different, but they mix together well. So not only is this not quite proven, we don't really know that these ideas are good, even though we know that they are from this same influential person. But the other main reason we can't pick complementary is it doesn't match the tone of BF, which is a nice kind of more neutral tone. Complementary is more positive. And then we have impactful and suitable. Suitable, I would say, is the most completely out of these, where like it just kind of doesn't make that much sense. Suitable for what? But it's totally possible that these systems of thoughts were impactful, were complementary. They probably are distinguished from each other in some way. So it's a reminder of something that's generally true in GRE verbal. Lots of answers could be true if you make up a story about them, but only the right answers would definitely be true. So that could versus would is another sort of big focus of ruling out the odd word out. Okay, got a few more. So far, lots of right answers coming in the chat for those of y'all who are here. Thanks for joining, by the way. Let's see if I can stump you with any of these. Try this one. Let us know in the chat once you have a couple of answers you want to vote for. Yeah, y'all are spotting in the chat. I think there's a couple pairs here and a couple other words that are outside of pairs. But we've got a nice pair of decrease and diminish. And then we've got another pair of sort of incite and provoke. So let's take a minute here and think about which of these pairs do we think is closest to being proven between decrease, diminish, or incite, provoke. Tell me in the chat, I think we had at least one vote for each pair. Why do you like your pair? What evidence do you see? Or are you kind of 50-50? Let's keep thinking about that. I want to notice something great though, which is that Kayla, you mentioned that first you liked forbid, and I think that's because a couple of y'all right now in the chat are calling out, okay, there's kind of a negative tone to the sentence. We've got an undue burden. We're talking about opponents. We're talking about a possible financial downturn. Sounds like something bad. Forbid, right off the bat, it sounds like it would probably be challenging if international trade would be forbidden, but it doesn't really have a good pair. So it goes with, kind of goes with decrease, diminish, but it's too strong. Too strong. So here's kind of a possible false triple between forbid, decrease, diminish. They all have to do with having less trade, but forbid is too strong. Maintain, I'd say, is out. Doesn't look like anybody considered that, but yeah, there's clearly a change going on here. The question is, do we think there's going to be more international trade or less international trade? It sounds like there's sort of votes for both in the chat. And I have to admit, I kind of see why. I actually wrote this question earlier this evening as kind of like a modified version of a question that already existed. And I can see why there's some thinking on both sides. I was on the side of decrease and diminish when I initially wrote the question. And I think it's an interesting case sometimes to think about what makes a good question or a bad question, and it can help us learn about what the test does when they're making questions. So I want to talk about why I was initially thinking decrease, diminish, but why I can kind of see why incite, provoke is maybe a little bit too possible, and how maybe if I was refining this question to really put it in an official practice test or something, maybe I would put in another clue. I was thinking kind of what I said about what led us into forbid, that if there's a financial downturn, generally less trade would be more likely to lead to a financial downturn, and more trade would be more likely to be good, to be economically good, economically helpful. That's what I was thinking. But if I gave this to a fellow teacher and said, can you review this problem? I could see someone saying, you know what? We're really not supposed to bring in too much outside knowledge on the GRE. And this could be an example of a real life assumption. I would say this borders on the type of real world assumption we are often not supposed to make. It's always a little bit of gray area to figure out exactly how much can we assume, how much background knowledge can we bring in from our real life. The fact that a financial downturn would more likely come from decreasing international trade seems likely to me, but hard to say so for sure, because, for example, it could be a city that relies more on local trade, not on international. So there could be definitely examples where it's not the case. This is a little bit outside of the topic of the night, but I'm curious, anybody in the chat, how could we maybe adjust this question? Oh, you guys probably can't see that for now. How could we adjust this question to make sure B and D are correct? Think like a test maker. Is there anything we could add to the sentence to make decrease, diminish more solidly correct? I'm thinking about it too. I see an interesting note in the chat. I think that's getting us in the right direction until they're able to establish new industries. I think this helps. Yeah, this helps to say like, okay, these particular cities, I'm trying to think of things that would definitely make sure that these particular cities might struggle in response to decreased international trade, and maybe establish helps get us to a place where these particular cities won't have, what it takes to grow without international trade. But I wonder if we can get something even more concrete. I've got something in mind now, but I'm curious to hear if y'all have anything else that you think might help secure B and D if we were to change this sentence. I think I'm going to add something like the economies of local port cities that rely heavily on overseas shipping. What this does is it gives us really solid evidence in the form of sort of overseas shipping that these towns, this helps confirm that these particular cities benefit from international trade as is. I think the problem, as I had it before, is it could have been true that these cities actually wanted there to be less international trade. Wasn't really quite strong enough evidence to say otherwise. So, accidental mini lesson in good problem writing, because I think I wrote this one for tonight with a little bit too much wiggle room. That's why we always look at each other's questions whenever we write them. The rest of the questions tonight I have taken directly from our 5-pound book without sort of rewriting. So let's go try a couple more of those. See some more false triples, more identification here, like where we had 2 pairs and a couple unpaired words. This is going to be a really common pattern: a correct pair, an incorrect pair, and a word that kind of goes with the correct pair, but is off somehow. Try this one. All right. Getting a couple votes in. Kayla says, I think C, but I'm not sure, a similar word. Kavran says B and C. And then I also have a chat note that B feels too extreme, so maybe it's C and F. And yeah, sorry, I had the wrong F word there. I might have replaced it before you guys found it. So B, C, and F are being considered here. And I want to go through some of the chat notes and talk about how, yes, y'all are spot on with some of these chat notes. Kayla's first chimed in, I think C. I think it's C as well. That's one of our correct answers. Absolute, meaning total. Meaning sort of can't be sort of denied or changed. Then there's tyrannical. Or sorry, I wanted to say why this sort of word comes from the sentence. Well, it's talking about how in one instant things are negated. They're also saying we know it's a power of the presidency, so it's some sort of way to make decisions that has power over other decisions that might have been made. So it makes sense, absolute authority to grant pardons. Then there was this note that tyrannical was too extreme, and I think I agree. Tyrannical also kind of total, not just kind of, also can mean total power, for sure. But is it too extreme? Too opinionated? Tyrannical has a very negative tone. Absolute doesn't have as negative of a tone. So I'm suspicious of it. What do y'all think of F? Is unknown a good match for absolute? Or is there anything else that's a good match for absolute? I'm feeling a little weird about unknown. I'm not sure what that would mean here. Unknown authority could possibly mean like no one else has this authority, but it reads to me almost like that people don't know about it in a more literal sense, and it also doesn't feel like a great match for absolute. There's also unbiased. I see a note in the chat. Yeah, that one could be worth considering. I think that one might be closer to absolute. Unbiased, though, I think its meaning is, it means kind of neutral. It means neutral or objective. Is that the same as absolute? I think I finally stumped y'all. Y'all have been getting all of these right, especially once we fix that last one. But surprisingly, the word that matches absolute here is categorical. Categorical has nothing to do with categories in this sense. It actually means kind of absolute and final. If I say I am categorically not going to your party, that means I am never going to go to your party. It's absolutely out of the question that I'm going to go to your party. It's a word that we don't hear all that often, but I bet some of y'all have heard at some point. And it's a case where it doesn't mean exactly what it looks like, since it reminds us so much of category. There's a lesson here, though. No one felt great about their pair that they were picking. I had some consideration out there of absolute tyrannical. I had some thinking of absolute unbiased and of absolute unknown. But in each case, there was a little bit of, well, I don't know. I'm not sure it's a match. I'm not sure. Now, you probably felt the same thing about D in this case, but let this be a lesson that basically, if there's not a pair you like, it's okay to pick a word you don't know, because it has to be a pair, but it doesn't have to be a word you know. There's no rule saying you have to know the word, but there is a rule saying the two words have to make equivalent sentences. Picking words that you don't know is scary. It's not something you're going to be doing all that often, but it is something you're probably going to do at some point. And for me personally, this is, I think, the most common place that I do it is when I'm on a sentence equivalence. I'm really confident in the first word, and there's just no other word that I think fits. I start to think, well, you know what? It might be the word, but that I don't know what it means. Good question in the chat. If we pick a word we don't know and it's wrong, do we lose points for the whole question? The short answer is no. You always either just get it right or get it wrong. There's no penalty for getting it wrong compared to leaving it blank. So Kayla, I think that would answer your question, that basically it doesn't matter how you get it wrong, it's just wrong or right. Some standardized tests back in the day kind of would like punish you for getting a wrong answer as opposed to leaving it blank. Like you could even kind of get a negative point. On the GRE, it's not like that. So quick, very important lesson about GRE strategy. Always leave a guess, because there's no penalty for a wrong answer, like compared to a blank, or compared to a question you don't answer. It's actually very, very powerful, this fact, because it means that, yeah, number one, you should always leave an answer. Never leave a question without putting a random guess. It also means that, you know, it's totally fine to learn to guess and skip on the questions that are the hardest for you, if you tend to run out of time. Many test takers at some point in their journey, they struggle with timing. We can't get into that too much tonight because it's not our subject, but look for ways as you study to actually learn what some subjects are your weaknesses, and try not to, on test day, spend too much time on those questions, because you can just leave a guess, go on, use your time more wisely on the questions that you have a better shot at. Okay, let's do a couple more. We got 10 more minutes or so. Here is, oh, that's the last one I have in the slideshow, but I got another one. Got another one pulled up in a different mode. Here I've upped the vocab word difficulty a little bit in my very, very fancy screenshot, Windows screenshot here. This is from our 5-pound book as well. Try it out, and you can refer to these in your answers as like A, B, C, D, E. Tell me what you think it is. All right. So we have votes for myriad, surplus, and plethora. Let's talk about those. I think this is an example of one of these sort of false triples I'm talking about, where these words are pretty. They have a lot of overlap. What's surplus? What does a surplus mean? Tell me in the chat if you have sort of like a definition of any of these three: a surplus, a myriad, or a plethora. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I got three good ones. A surplus means basically an extra amount. Plethora means a lot, and myriad means a variety. With those three sort of summary definitions, what should we pick? All right. Kevron's chiming in D and F after hearing those definitions, and I agree. I agree. That is the answer to this one. Myriad and plethora. Here, let me do this. Myriad and plethora. And surplus is kind of the odd word out. Part of that is that I think a myriad and a plethora can both mean, if we sort of keep talking about basically the ways they're using sentence, they can both actually mean many related species in this case. Whereas a surplus kind of always means like an amount over something, over what's expected. It's not always positive or negative, but it does sort of specifically tie into these this idea of excess. So it's the odd word out. It's a bit too extreme. Let's talk about these other words. A contraband and an aurora both kind of don't really make sense here. Contraband being basically illegal materials, and aurora being, as far as I know, just the sort of lighting phenomenon that occurs up in the Arctic. If there is another definition that is used out there, I don't know it. A pantheon, though, is probably a little closer. A pantheon is basically a collection of the best of something. So if I'm talking about the pantheon of, I don't know, potato chips, I'm talking about what I think are the very best brands of potato chips. A pantheon of related species would be in some way implying that it's a specific group of them, but it's actually like an elite group, a particularly respected group of these bird species. So this is a classic case of, it makes sense sort of in the sentence grammatically, but there's no evidence that we're talking about particularly good birds. These poor birds who are getting this virus. Is there evidence for myriad and plethora? Yeah, we're talking about related species, so it makes sense to be talking about a variety of them. And we're also talking, we can see sort of a theme where we originally were talking about, well, it must have started in one species, but it has spread, it seems, to all these others. Okay. It's almost 9, but maybe we have time for one more sort of lightning round one. Let me pull up one more sentence equivalence question here. In the meantime, for those of y'all who are here live, any questions in the chat you want to ask about sentence equivalence in general, or some of the sort of false triple solving we've been doing here tonight, of like finding words that kind of match the meaning, but just don't quite have a good pair. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. We're going to do sort of an end of evening quick round of answer choice analysis. See if we can find any pairs or false triples. In a set of words, a set of related words. This will be our last thing. Thanks for joining tonight, y'all. Sorry I had a couple typos in my slides tonight. What I've got here on the board is this can kind of be like an end of night vocab quiz almost. I'm popping up 2 lists of words. Each list has some pairs, or at least one pair, I'll say. Here it is. And if you want sort of a last sort of vocab learning of the night, or attempt at sort of pair identification, can you find the pairs without even reading the sentence? There's no sentences here. These are some tough words, but just let me know in the chat in the next minute or so if you see any that are pairs. Yeah, these words are tough, especially list 2, I think. If you haven't done much vocab studying yet, there's a lot of ways to find GRE vocab. Unfortunately, the GRE themselves don't publish an official list. If only they did. One of my favorite ways is our YouTube channel, as well as having this free prep hour series. The other biggest thing it has is a GRE word of the day series, which has like a couple hundred vocab word videos that are like 30 seconds to a minute each. So check those out if you like. And yeah, I see a bunch of the combinations coming through in the chat. Garrulous and loquacious. These 2 both mean very talkative. Taciturn and reticent. These 2 both mean almost the opposite. Not very talkative. Someone who's kind of shy or reserved. And then gregarious and convivial. Those are a match too. So lots of pairs here in list 2. And these both mean friendly and outgoing. I think if I was looking at list 2 and I had to pick a right answer, maybe there was some glitch or something, I can't even see my computer screen, I would probably go for this one or this one. Why? Because they're opposites. And I know the test loves including some opposite answers. So I would just go for one of the pairs that I'm like, okay, it's 50-50. It's probably one of these. Over here on the left, we do have a couple pairs as well. Hiatus and lull. Both of these can be applied in sort of different ways, but they both mean like a pause in the action. If there is a hiatus or a lull in sort of the action in a fight or something, it means there's a brief time when there's no fighting. And then there is also acme and epitome. Again, epitome is used in a couple different ways, but both of these words can mean a sort of like the best version of something. So if my singing career reaches its epitome or its acme, both of those mean like the peak point of what my singing career is ever going to be. I don't have one of those, but if I had one, its acme would be its peak. In this one, I might guess epitome acme because of the fact that nadir down here is a low point, kind of like the lowest point of something, kind of an opposite to epitome acme. So again, that opposite thinking, the fact that maybe they're trying to tempt me with an opposite, might lead me to guess this. Of course, there's no telling without seeing the sentence. All right, thanks y'all. Thanks for joining. If you watched online, thanks for watching. Check out the rest of our series. And we do a couple of these a month, so I hope y'all watch another one. Have a good night. Good luck on your study process. And I hope this session helped a little bit with getting you used to sentence equivalence, finding the two answers that match each other. And if there's three answers that kind of match, look to cut out the one that it's maybe too extreme or has a different tone or maybe has a different sort of grammatical usage. Thanks, y'all. Have a good night.